So I think one of the strategic outcomes and wins was for the first time in 28 years, most of the countries agreed to move away from fossil fuels. So I do believe that these convenings are important. We have never ever as humanity faced such a massive crisis, but we also have an amazing opportunity to unite and solve it. So I definitely feel like there's been a transition within the energy space. You're seeing more and more shifts towards renewables, be it solar, be it wind farms. There's a lot of discussions about hydro energy and stuff like that. So it's definitely becoming more and more prevalent in the industry. Hi, my name is Candice Knipe, and I'm a corporate affairs executive in the energy space. I'm a 2024 African Climate Ambassador. So as mentioned, I am a corporate affairs executive in the energy space. I try to protect companies' corporate identities and reputations by doing good business and good corporate governance. I decided to take up the role as an African Climate Ambassador because I felt like I had an important role to play. I am on this journey learning more about what climate change means, and I'd like to take you along with me. So first, before we get into what is COP28 and the African Climate Summit, I think it's important just to understand what does this all mean for us as Africans. For the longest part, 28 years to be exact, 198 countries have convened annually at COP, trying to negotiate agreements and discuss important issues. But what does that really mean? I think for the most part, we had a global narrative which was very much focused on the North, where certain things like energy transitions and renewables was something that they're very comfortable with. But for Africans, what many people don't know is that over 600 million Africans don't have access to energy. So how do we transition into a renewable space when we don't even have a base to work from? So I think it's important that we convened as Africans and that we looked at the energy space from an African narrative. We have such an important role to play on this continent because we account for 40% of natural minerals which are required to transition, yet we don't capitalize on those opportunities. So I think it's important that we had a summit that was specific for our purpose and our narrative. So I think one of the strategic outcomes and wins was for the first time in 28 years, most of the countries agreed to move away from fossil fuels. But I think the fact that it took us 28 years to get to this consensus highlights some of the points and the struggles that we have when we convene at an international level. But I think it is important. The fact that there was some debate about moving away completely or phasing out. However, from an African perspective, especially a country like South Africa that relies so much on fossil fuels for power generation, it is important to understand that it's very difficult for us to just move completely away and that a more just transition would be required. And I think that was really important, a takeaway from that. So I do believe that these convenings are important. We have never ever as humanity faced such a massive crisis, but we also have an amazing opportunity to unite and solve it. But I find very often that whilst these treaties and negotiations and all these convenings are really, really important for us to get to the solution, I think that we need to work better on creating more awareness on what some of these solutions are and how and a narrative that is maybe a little bit more understanding for the masses, because it is something that's going to require us to unite and to do it together. So I definitely feel like there's been a transition within the energy space. You're seeing more and more shifts towards renewables, be it solar, be it wind farms. There's a lot of discussions about hydro energy and stuff like that. So it's definitely becoming more and more prevalent in the industry. We're seeing a lot more corporates releasing tenders for these kinds of projects, which tells me that there's action happening. However, I feel like it is very challenging for a country like South Africa, where where there's such a heavy reliance on fossil fuels, and also it's massive corporates that are benefiting from the current traditional way of energy. So there is a bit of a disconnect, and I feel like in order for us to get there, we do need to obviously have better discussions, more robust discussions. There seems to be a lot of recognition for the problem, but not necessarily sufficient action to back that problem. So it's definitely a space where we're having some kind of action towards renewables. There's definitely a lot of convenience, a lot of discussions as to how this would look and what would it translate. Like we've got communities which are heavily reliant on coal industries. We've got infrastructure that is designed for coal power plants, and there's now conversations about what would that look like to retrofit it, to re-engineer those plants to be more greener. So yes, there's definitely action happening, and I think it's important. So I definitely feel like the energy transition is a big challenge for us as a country and as a continent. I think that it's a very complex problem, which we have lots of different landscapes to consider, like social, economic, geopolitical, and environmental challenges that go with it. However, we also have a continent with the youngest population, and as we all know that young people are exceptionally innovative, I think we've got all the resources required to transition. And I think it's an exciting opportunity, because I do believe that Africa holds the key that will unlock this renewable and this energy transition to a more greener, sustainable Africa continent. So definitely it's an exciting time, and it's definitely an exciting opportunity for us. The generations to come will either remember our generation as the ones that neglected them, or the ones that came up with solutions to build a sustainable future. So as I mentioned, I truly believe that the energy transition is a massive opportunity for us as a country and as a continent. We've relied so much on traditional technologies that has rightfully supplied us with job creation and sustainable livelihoods. But there's an alternative that we all need to consider. And what would that look like? I think when we enter into this renewable space, with its solar, whether it be wind, whether it be hydro energy, with those different projects and mindsets will come new opportunities that we would be able to harness. We are only entering the journey of renewables and the transition, and I think it's an exciting time as we understand what that actually means for the person on the ground, and how we would be able to unlock different opportunities, be it the growth in our economy or our job creation. As youth and as young people, we have an opportunity to not just do traditional careers, but to explore what a career would look like in the renewable space. Be it an electrician that's transitioning from a normal traditional business to putting up a solar panel, or an architect that's no longer designing a house, but designing a sustainable living area. I think it's an exciting time, and I think we've got a great story to tell. So I think before we look at what a just transition is, how many of us really know what climate change is, or what climate action is, or what climate impacts are, or what all of that means to us? Well, very recently I was privileged enough to do a presentation, and I realized how many people didn't actually know that when we say net zero, net neutral, or keeping it below 1.2, we weren't talking about the temperatures that you feel on a daily basis. We were referring to the surface temperature. This surface temperature has got catastrophic effects on the globe. It's causing the ice caps in the north and the south to melt, which means the water rises. So your coastal regions become more susceptible to floods or to being washed away, or more recently, waves the size of buildings. So those are some of the impacts that we have when we talk about a net zero or a climate increase in temperature. And what does that mean in terms of impacts? Well, many people don't think it bothers them, but when the temperatures increase, we have things like drought, which means people that rely on agricultural activities or farming suffer. They don't have income, and animals don't have water that is needed to survive. So while we think it doesn't bother us, it does, because when we don't have sufficient agricultural practices, it increases the price of food, and it increases our ability, or it puts us at risk, and that's why we hear the thing food security. Some of the other impacts that are felt is that certain companies rely on project-sensitive work. So how do you then factor in no productivity when we have extreme temperatures like 40 or 42 degrees and it's practically impossible for someone to work under those conditions? Or we have an entire site washed away with a flood and now we have to start all over again. Those are just some of the impacts that we need to discuss and we need to unpack, and that's what it means when we say climate impacts and climate change. So I think many people like me didn't really understand what the impact of climate change meant. It seemed like a remote and foreign term. But climate change and the impacts that that has on our country as well as the continent, it doesn't segregate, it impacts everyone. The droughts we're seeing more often, the extreme weather conditions, the flooding, the crop loss, the agriculture impacts, that impacts everyone. And whilst many of our governments and important nationals meet annually at the COP and the African Climate Summits, where they're making all these commitments and lobbying for support and money, it is important that as citizens we understand what that means and we hold them accountable to those commitments and to those progressions that they have promised and those agreements that they have engaged in. Because at the end of the day, they are doing it on our support and our behalf, and we need to feel that those impacts are actually being transferred and related to us. So to the leaders and the decision makers, it has taken us 28 years to all agree that fossil fuels is a cause of climate change. Unfortunately, we don't have another 28 years for action. We need bold leaders to make bold decisions and to carry through on the actions. And we need you to stand up and make those decisions so that we can have a sustainable future.